Okay, let's read from James, the book of James. That's a good book for you, for all of us. James chapter 4. Yes, indeed. How about 6? But he giveth more grace. Speaking of God's favor. Wherefore he saith, God resisteth the proud, but giveth grace unto the humble. Submit yourselves therefore to God. Resist the devil, and he will flee from you. Now those are quite the statements. We've talked about how God gives more grace, which is his favor. And I expect we all wondered, when does that show up? And I kind of suspicion it shows up more than we suspect or even detect. God's favor. But we want to talk about first here, God resists the proud, but gives grace to the humble. Now I read out of the King James, and that's exactly what it says. God resists the proud. Now, how about stopping and thinking about that? I have to. My gracious. That tells me, well, first of all, there's a God, and that there's humans down here that can get proud. And in between those two thoughts, God takes action. He exercises resistance. To who? To me? To any of us? Well, what's that all about? God resists the proud. Ouch. But he favors the humble. Now who are you going to take up with? And how do you know if you're there? Something to think about. Well, let's look here. The proud are those who have too much self-esteem. Now that's an interesting thought, because we're always trying to have more self-esteem. Teach our children to have more self-esteem. So you come along and say the proud are those who have too much. Well, then I guess there is that possibility. Have too much self-esteem. But it helps us to know what we're talking about. Also, the proud are those who have unreasonable conceit of their importance. Well, we try to teach to feel important. Don't look down on yourself and diminish yourself. But there is this aspect of having an unreasonable amount of self-importance. Now, how do you know where one leaves off and the other one starts? Well, this thing gets tough, but it is something to think about because it's in the book, and God resists the proud, and he has favor for the humble. Am I humble? Hello. Well, it says humble, so what about the humble? Well, the humble are those to have a reasonable estimation of themselves. Now that sounds logical. Gives us something to think about, have a reasonable estimation of ourselves. So one's too much and one's just right. And the humble attach no undue excellence to themselves. Now I suppose if we really sat and pondered this, we would kind of discuss and say, well, you come up this far, but when you go beyond that, then you've done it. Where's the line that you draw exactly? Well, I don't know. But all of this makes us think about this. Do I fall into the category of being proud, or do I fall into the category of being humble? And am I trying, I'd say, am I trying hard enough to be just right? And who can be just right? Quit asking these questions and let's think. So you see, pride gives a person a high degree of self-esteem. And I think as we observe people and life, it isn't too hard, if we're fair, it isn't too hard to see who is and who isn't. And if we're honest enough, we'll point a finger at ourselves and do a decent job of evaluating. This is a part of living by faith. But just realize, as we've talked about these things and as you meditate later, that this is a necessary thing for us to do, because God does resist the proud, and we don't want to be there. Pure and simple. So you see, we don't want to get to that place where there's some kind of reaction by God. Now let me read you this just for ponder's sake. This preacher was training other students to preach. And when one of his students went into the pulpit, he went in with every expression of confidence. He felt good about what he was doing or going to do, but after a while he found out it was pretty difficult standing there trying to be a good preacher behind the pulpit. So when he came down, he was very distressed, this young preacher. He was almost brokenhearted because things just didn't turn out the way he thought they should. So he went to the preacher man who was training him and asked him about it. But all this mentor said back to him was this: if you had gone up to the pulpit as you came down from the pulpit, you would have come down from the pulpit as you went up. Now think about that. I had to for a bit. In other words, if you'd have gone up there as humble as you were humble when you came down, things would have been a whole lot different. That gives us a little insight, doesn't it? Yeah. But just keep in mind that God resists pride. And it's something that we all work on. So what does this mean? Now, I don't know all is categorized in God's resistance. But I'm sure, from what I do know, that in His providence, He knows exactly if we've got too much self-esteem in all that we've talked about. He knows if we are trying to be humble. Now, I wished I could trace or track the exacts of this, and so do you, so that we'd know a little more perfectly, I guess. But my only answer to that is that if we live each day to court the favor of God every day, that we'll go a long ways in perfecting our humility and crucifying our pride. And of course, you all know there's a lot of ways that either of these are displayed. So your Bible, let your Bible guide you. Spend more time with that Bible, because it gives you the insights and the thoughts and all that reveal the attitude of God and what should be our attitudes in life. The Bible. Your prayers will steady you. It's kind of hard to pray one way and act another way. Your church going will encourage you. I know as I watch and I've gotten older, it's difficult to make sure you're in church always, because there's so many other things that allure us and so many other things that tire us. But church going, you'll pick up on some things as we blend with each other and as we hear some good thoughts. Now, I know I give you some good thoughts. May not be as fast as you'd like to hear them, but you get some good thoughts. Yeah, you do. So church, and your attitude will calm you. You know, there's a lot of things that we can do about our attitude. And we all know that, and we all work on that. And sometimes even our voice tone gets out of order, because inside of us we're feeling some kind of urgency or some kind of feeling. So we convey words that don't fit what we actually are thinking. Talk too much, I guess. They say that our voice tone creates 38% of our verbal conveyance. So even that's important. But altogether, we need to safeguard whether or not we are proud or humble, because again, listen, if God likes one way and He doesn't like the other way, I want to be on the right side of the fence, at least trying. Someone said this: one way to restore humility is to read the help wanted ads. Then you'll be surprised how many positions there are which you are ignorant about, and you're unattractive for it, and you're too old to fill it. Now, I don't read the paper, but I thought that was a good thing to remind you of. So, do the right things that help you avoid the pride. And I wouldn't be a bit surprised at some of the things that happens to us in life that makes us feel ugly or want to react ugly. A lot of these things happen to us to kind of sandpaper what needs. So anyway, never forget that God gives His favor to a humble position. This means that God shows and bestows favor on us when we maintain a humble spirit about us. Now, I'm sure this is necessary in life because even when we're thinking about salvation and saving our souls and joining the family of God, that a good, proper attitude is necessary to evaluate all that. In the same way with living out life, we need the humble approach to life as we constantly work on it so that the best things of life might come our way. So that God doesn't have to stir the pot with His disfavor because we don't have the right attitude. Now, I don't know what all this means to you. I know what I've had to struggle with, and you know what you need to struggle with. So we struggle on. You know, we all need someone or something bigger than us. And to us, that's God. And everything about God and what He's told us to do or not do. Yeah. We need all of this. So it does take a humble attitude to realize that. This is kind of God's roadmap. But remember, in this particular thought, the Bible just read to us that God resists the proud. And I can be that just as much as anyone if I'm not working on it. The Bible said He resists us, but He gives grace and favor to those who are humble. I read this the other day. Might help a little bit. A rich man once invited many of his honored guests for a feast. His own chair, he richly decorated it, and it was placed at one end of the table, a long table, and it was just sitting there. So they knew who was going to sit in it. So while he was away, each guest came in and seated themselves according to their own esteem, positioning themselves in the sight of this man who had invited them. So they sat close to the chair and all that. Now when time came and everyone was seated, then the master came in to sit in his chair. But what did he do? He took the chair and put it down at the other end of the table. Where the peons were sitting, probably. You know, there's some things that we can think about. God resists the proud, but He gives favor to the other side of that. So let me close with this. Submit yourselves to God. That's what it said. He tells us the other, and He tells you the answer. Obviously, this states that there is a God. None of us have to be convinced of that, But you know, are we so convinced of God that yes, He's very real to us? People very easily say, I believe in God today. But how much do you really believe in God? Is He personal? Is He a God who is real personable, with concerns about your welfare? That's our God. Now, we don't think so because so many of the ugly things happen, but God does care. You need to be convinced of that. And He's a God who has the authority to demand us to be humbled as a child of His. He's got that authority. So this is a challenge for us to submit to this kind of a eternal one. I think a lot of us have settled that a long time ago. We're not going to fuss with God. Why? Why should we? He's in charge of all this. He started all this. It's not unreasonable. So I don't question it. I settled that a long time ago. There's no way that I knowingly am I going to shake a finger at God. That's why we do what we do during the week and why we do what we do on the Lord's Day. We submit ourselves to God. We will submit to God if for no other reason than to have His favor. The Bible teaches us enough, and the Bible's exact enough in regard to coming to salvation and becoming a child of God. Very plain. In regard to living as a child of God, very plain. We respect God. Why shouldn't we submit to God? With no question. What did you do in regard to your parents? I've told you this before. You probably have to hear me again. The older I get, the more I regret the times that I wasn't just what I could have been maybe for my parents, especially when they got older. Yeah. Don't ever sass your parents. Don't ever go against your parents. Don't ever be unkind to your parents. Because once they're dead, you'll carry the discomfort of that to your grave. That's right, no. So we submit ourselves to God. And I want to close with this. We've been told to not be proud. We've been told to be humble. Now I got a smile for you. In a certain pond on one of these farms out east, there were 2 ducks and a frog. They were neighbors, they were best friends, and all day long they played in that pond. But the hot summer came on, and that water began to dry up in the pond. So they all realized they were going to move, had to move. So the ducks, you know, they could easily fly out of there, but what was that frog going to do? So finally it was decided that the 2 ducks would take a stick between each other in their bills. And the frog would hang on to that stick. And they'd fly him out of that pond and go to a bigger pond. So as they flew, a farmer looked up and they saw that thing that was going overhead. And he said, well, isn't that clever? a clever idea. I wonder who thought up that idea. And the frog said, I did. You'll have to figure out the rest of the story. Now, submit to God and keep your mouth shut.